Hello, my name is Edu Delm. I'm an indie game developer, working on the remake of my first game, Prisoner. Some weeks ago I decided to learn 3D modeling and animation, and to make the process more fun, I decided to remake my first game. In my last devlog I talk about this in depth, so check that video out if you want. Also, if you want to get more frequent updates about this project, follow me in these social sites. Alright, let's review what I did these past 2 weeks. Prisoner was a pretty simple game. You have to defeat all enemies in a room to progress to the next one. For that, I needed enemies. The standard enemy of Prisoner is a melee soldier. He runs around until the player gets in his sight. Then he chases the player until he's close enough to attack. Give him a few hits and he's gone. I started by making a model of the enemy. Using the main character for reference, I decided to make the enemies slightly taller than the player. For the 3D models of this game I'm using a single material. This material contains a palette of colors. Then the UVs of the model are mapped to show one of these colors. I can choose different colors for different parts of the model. But if I want to create a metallic armor, I needed another material. The idea is to have some parts of the enemy with the general material, such as the skin and the clothes underneath the armor, and then assign the metallic material to the armor part. This will allow me to have different values in the materials, and make the armor react to the lighting. Next, I had to read the character, so I can animate him. It's a complex subject, but I think that I'm getting used to it, at least for these simple characters. With the rig done, it was time to do the animations. I wanted to create more animations than I did for the main character. I will need an idle, walk, and run animations for the basic behavior. For the combat, a couple of attack variations, in addition to their corresponding preparation animation. In case of the main character, I included this preparation in the attack itself, but for the enemy I wanted to separate those animations to have more control. For example, I might want to increase the time the enemy prepares for an attack, to give the player more time to avoid them. Having this preparation in another animation gives me the option of tweaking the duration and adjust the overall difficulty of the combat. I also needed hit animations, for when the player receives an attack. To start, 2 of these would be nice, to add some variety. Death animations are needed too, as I don't plan on using ragdolls for the project. Maybe for the next one. And, to finish with the enemy animations, a detection animation. The thing with the original Prisoner is that the enemies didn't show any hint of sensing the player. They just ran after the character if it was close enough. For the remake, I would love more expression on the enemies, and having them react to seeing the player is a good way to do it. With that done, I imported the enemy and its animations to Unity. Then, I created an enemy controller to determine its behavior. There are 2 versions of this enemy. One where he goes along a path until seeing the player, and another where he moves randomly, searching for points on the numbness. By the way, I'm using Unity's numbness to handle the pathfinding of this project. The enemies count with a numbness agent to avoid collisions, and other agents. For the enemy that follows a path, I created some waypoints. These waypoints have 2 values, their position and waiting time. They are organized on a list, telling the enemy the order of the patrol. When reaching a point, the waypoint wait time is checked, and tells the enemy if he has to wait or not. This allows me to create levels where the player can learn the enemy's patrols and sneak on them. But for the second version is different, there are no waypoints set. The enemy sets for a point in a radius, and makes sure that the point is in the numbness, otherwise he wouldn't be able to move over there. But this kind of behavior is dangerous, as the enemy might run into places he shouldn't be. For that, I thought about adding these colliders, acting as wandering zones. If the enemy has one of these zones assigned, he won't go outside of the collider's bounds. Also, as there are no waypoints, I can assign waiting time on these random stops, so I added a couple of values for the enemy controller, waiting probability and waiting time. The first one is a percentage. Every time the enemy reaches one of these points, a random number is calculated. If it is lower than this percentage, the enemy will wait before going to the next point. And to make things more interesting, the other value, waiting time, is a random range. I can input a minimum and maximum time for these waiting states. Then, as with the percentage, a random waiting time is assigned to the enemy. I think this will give the enemy behavior more realism, don't you? Okay, so I have movement for the enemies, but they can react to the player without eyes. For that, I created another component called Enemy Vision Sensor. This sensor will check for the player in an angle in front of the enemy. To have a better preview of this new system, I added some lines in the editor of Unity to see what's the cone of vision of the enemy. Those lines won't be visible in the game, but are great for debugging and bug fixing. The way it works is this. If the enemy is patrolling a route or moving randomly, this sensor will check for the player. The moment the player gets in this vision cone, it will be set as a target. At the start of this new mechanic, I only had a debug message telling me when the player was detected, but it was great to figure things out. Before I started assigning the animation for the detection mechanic, I revisited my detect animation. I wasn't happy with it and gave it another try. This time I tried to be more expressive with the movement of the enemy. First, he looks at the character, then he gets startled. I think that using this animation will make clearer to the player that an enemy has seen him or she. I also added some effects for the enemy's footsteps, and a gas sound for when the player is seen. At this stage, the enemy will stop the patrol, get startled and start chasing the player. He wasn't a big threat for the player, seemed more like a stalker. But hey, at least the pathfinding was working great. He wouldn't leave me alone. It was time to use tag with sword. Now when the enemy reaches the player, a random attack is performed. For now I only have these two variations, but I think that's enough for a simple enemy like this. Then I added the swing particle effect to the enemy's sword. At the start it was the exact same as the player's effect, but tweaking a bit its color and size, I think I achieved a distinctive effect. And on top of this, adding sound effects will do the trick to have a good attack. Speaking of details, I wasted some time investigating look IK. This allowed me to override the head movement of a character and make it look wherever I want. It wasn't important for the game, but I think it will add a bit of quality to it. What do you think? Anyways, I combine my enemy behavior with this look IK. If the player is target and is close enough, the enemy will look at him. The great thing about this IK is that you can set limits to it. For example, if the player is behind the enemy but close to him, he won't turn its neck 180 degrees. I could make it turn 180 degrees, but that will be a little weird, right? In the next episode I will create a health system, so the character of the game can be hurt and react to the impacts. But for a change of scenery, I decided to get rid of the floor of the dungeon. It was pretty empty in my opinion, so I created a texture to simulate a rock floor. What do you think? Maybe it's too dark, but I didn't like how it looked when it had the same color as the walls. And to finish these 2 weeks, I kinda fixed something that was bugging me. You could see outside of the game's map. I placed these black planes to simulate darkness outside of the game's boundaries. I say that I kinda fixed it, because I'm feeling that this is a horrible way of addressing this problem. Do you know how to achieve this effect a better way? Leave a comment below, and I will be grateful forever and ever. I also was thinking about having some kind of boundaries for the camera, so it doesn't go too far into the blackness, but that will have to wait for another episode. What do you think about the progress so far? I am enjoying too much creating this project, modeling and animating in 3D. Hope you find these videos entertaining as well. Remember to subscribe and activate notifications so you won't miss any new updates. Follow me on Twitter and all of these sites to get more frequent updates. I will also love to read some feedback in the comments, and new ideas are also a plus. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.